Hello and welcome to my YouTube channel High Level Coder, and in this video I'm going to explain to you what is a microservice architecture, which is the rage of the day. So all of us have heard about microservices, and I often see a confusion between REST services and microservices. Actually, two are very completely different things. Microservice means services are micro, which means the services themselves are very small, whereas a REST means a special communication type, a special way of naming our services, a special way of exposing our services. So you can have a huge service which is not a microservice, but still it can be a REST service. You can have a REST service which is a microservice. So coming back to our topic, microservice is basically a smaller service which is easier for us to manage. And that's the reason that we actually create microservice than a huge service, which we used to do in earlier days. So what we normally do in a microservice architecture is we split the backend functionality into smaller functional components and self-contained components which are independent or almost independent, so that the smaller functional components can actually work independently and they can be written and programmed in different programming languages and framework irrespective of another microservice. Normally, these microservices, they expose their functionalities via REST services, and they also have their own dedicated data store. And how they communicate with each other? They communicate with each other either synchronously or asynchronously. So we will go into more details of microservices architecture, but before that I would make a quick request to you. If you like my session, if you like my explanation, kindly go ahead and subscribe to my channel, because that would motivate me. So let's proceed. And here is an example of how we can create microservice samples from two very popular application types. One is an e-commerce application that we use every day, maybe Amazon or any other thing, and another is a bank application. So we all use these applications on a regular basis, and in previous years they were used to be made up of monolithic structures, and now they are actually split into smaller modules. The smaller modules are known as microservices. So an e-commerce application can be actually broken or can be actually split into parts like a product service, then a profile service, then a payment service, and then a shopping cart service, where each of the service has its own functionality. Like the product service will list the products, and then you can go to the product detail page where you can see the details of the products. The payment service will be responsible for handling payment via various gateways and using different types of or accepting different types of payments like card payment, internet banking payment, etc. The profile service would actually be related to customer profile, would actually store the customer profile, customer password, or maybe something else, and the shopping cart service will solely deal with the functionality of the shopping cart. Similarly, a bank application can be actually split into smaller microservice units, like also a profile service which contains the logic for the customer profile, then the payment service from where the customer can do transfers or can do bill payments and different other kinds of payments, loan service via which the customer can manage his loans, his various kinds of loans including mortgages, and then maybe a credit card service where the customer can manage his various kinds of credit cards, can see the different transactions on each of his credit card, and can also pay his credit card. So these are ways in which we can actually split a bigger monolithic application into smaller microservices, and that is precisely what is being done into this world. So we need to understand, and we need to actually split a huge application or a huge requirement into smaller microservices so that they are much easier to manage, and we will see more advantages and disadvantages of microservice. But before we proceed, another quick thing, I also have a blog written on the same topic, which is the link provided below, and my suggestion is you can go to the blog, give it a read, come back to the video and watch it again. Maybe that would be complimentary, but up to you, of course. So what are the advantages of microservice? Of course, independent deployment and hence more agile. Just think of deploying the entire bank application in one go. That's very risky, and so that's why that has to be done with a lot of care. Instead of deploying the entire bank application, maybe we just introduced a new functionality in the shopping cart, and we can deploy it in a more confident way and in a less risky way, because we are not deploying the entire bank application. And even if the deployment breaks, or even if we introduce a bug, it would be restricted to the shopping cart functionality and not to the entire banking functionality, or not to the entire e-commerce functionality. And then also another advantage is any unit can be, any of the microservice can be actually scaled independently of the other, which means, say for example, the product listing and the product detail page are more frequently accessed by customers. So there are many customers in an e-commerce app who come and visit only the product listing and product detail page. So that is more frequently accessed, and hence we can actually scale up the product list and the product detail functionality, like having more servers for that functionality, or using more advanced technologies to actually build that functionality in, and the other services can actually be still standard and also unimpacted. And also independent teams can work on each of the services without much dependencies on each other. So these are the different advantages of microservices architecture. That is the reason that everybody nowadays are using microservices, and nothing comes free. So microservices also has their own share of disadvantages, which means the overall architecture becomes more complex. So when I give example, when I introduce you to actual code, then you will see that the microservice architecture sometimes becomes a little bit more complex than the normal architecture, than the normal monolithic architecture which used to prevail in previous years, and sometimes can also be less performant if not designed properly, because sometimes we have a tendency of calling another microservice from one service, which degrades the performance of the called service and can also lead to data duplication, but that is fine if managed properly. So these are some of the disadvantages of the microservice architecture. Now, this is really important. Like, we really need to understand how the microservices communicate with each other, because no matter what, the microservices are independent and they are deployed also independent of each other. They have their own distinct functionalities, like the product microservice has its own functionality, which is different from the order microservice, which is different from the payments microservice. But it's true that they need to share some kind of data. So when a customer wants to proceed from the product listing page to order and finally wants to make the payment, so we need to actually transfer some data from one service to another, which can happen in either of the two ways. One way is a synchronous way, which is one service calls another service, which is the green line which I have shown in the diagram, and the other is the asynchronous way, when one service sends a message to a messaging system and the other service picks it up. So both of them have their advantages and disadvantages, but normally in today's world, asynchronous services are favored more because of lesser coupling, because of lesser dependency, and also because of better performance. And I'm going to create a lot of videos where I'm going to show you how we can actually design microservices in an asynchronous way, so that the communication between them is very loosely coupled. Okay, so that's it, and I hope this session was useful on the microservices architecture, and you had been able to understand at least how you can split an overall functionality into independent microservices, and also what are the advantages of microservices architecture, which is faster deployment is the main advantage, less riskier deployment, faster and less riskier deployment, and also how can two microservices communicate with each other synchronously and asynchronously, and what is the benefit of asynchronous communication, because asynchronous communication decouples completely one microservice from the other. Now, before we conclude, let me again remind you that there is a blog post where more details are there, and I would urge you to go to the blog post, give it a read, and come back and maybe again watch the video to have a better understanding. And last but not the least, and again, if you like my video and explanation, kindly go ahead and subscribe to my channel and like my video, because that's going to motivate me to produce more quality videos. Thank you very much.